All right, so for my theoretical stance presentation, I'm going to kind of take you through the top-down approach, the bottom-up approach, and the interactive approach, and discuss which one I find best fits my classroom and the needs of my students. Um, to begin with, why does it really even matter? It is very well known, it's proven that the more a teacher teaches with fidelity and has a high teacher efficacy, that they will impact their students even more. And studies have proven that students are more actively engaged and eager to participate when the teacher has clear and concise plans that she believes in. Unfortunately for me, I don't feel like I really even knew what I didn't know, if that makes sense. I didn't have the confidence or faithfulness in my own literacy instruction before this class, and the theoretical approaches and research that I have discovered already have and will continue to change my classroom drastically. So, what is the top-down approach? The top-down approach is a literacy approach in which students use the knowledge they already have to construct new meanings to words, text, and their environment. This theoretical approach focuses on seeing the big picture and then breaking it down into smaller pieces. So you think about the things that you already know, the knowledge that you already have, and in my classroom, I like to consider it like your filing cabinet in your brain, and we always refer to our filing cabinets, and I'll say, okay, we are talking about weather today. Go to that filing cabinet and you pick out all the files that you have about weather. So the theorists and theories that are related with this top-down approach would be Goodman's whole language theory, which encourages children to see words as whole pieces of language and then draw from their prior experiences to put meaning to those words. Rosenblatt's transactional reader response theory requires students to make their reading personal by paying attention to their own personal experiences and reading through that lens. So as they're reading, kind of drawing on the personal experiences that they have already had and thinking of those things side by side while they're reading in order to gain more understanding from the text that they're reading. And then Anderson and Pearson's schema theory for reading comprehension. It claims that the larger a child's schemata is regarding a topic or the strategies used to read that topic, then the greater the opportunity for retention. And so in my class, a lot of times when we refer to those filing cabinets, I have also taught them the term schema and schemata so that we can also use that terminology, but they know that that's referring to those filing cabinets that we have in their brain. And then we also have the bottom-up approach. And the bottom-up literacy approach is one in which students must build up from their foundational knowledge in order to gain comprehension. They start with identifying letters and sounds and then moving on to putting them together into words and later into sentences in order to comprehend them. I see this used very commonly with phonics. And the students learning, the different letters and then the different letter sounds and then the different blends and slowly building up those pieces of the words in order to put them together to form the whole word before you ever start to attach any comprehension or meaning to those words. The theorists and theories that are associated with this approach would be Go's information processing theory, which begins by translating the parts of written language into speech sounds and then piecing the sounds together to form words and then piecing the words together to form meaning. So it really is just like a puzzle where you take every individual little piece and you connect it together in order to get the big picture. And then LaBerge and Samuel's model is the automatic information processing, which is similar to Go's, but is different in that they believe it becomes automatic. So when students see these words, the information that is broken into these single units is processed, but then it becomes an automatic processing. So additionally, the units build onto one another to build comprehension. So whereas Go believes that this decoding continuously happens, LeBurg and Samuels believe that this decoding becomes automatic and the brain is not having to break each of these apart every time to provide meaning to them. So the difference between the top-down approach and the bottom-up approach would be that the top-down approach does believe that you should begin with the big picture and then you go down to the smaller units, whereas the bottom up is just that. You start at the bottom with all of the smaller units or the different puzzle pieces, and then you work your way up to form the large, bigger picture. So there is also the balanced interactive approach, which really just takes both of these approaches and interacts them together. So it doesn't rely solely on the bottom up or the top down. It's a combination of the two approaches, and there is one theory that I have researched that goes under this, but I also believe that anytime when you are interacting both of the different theoretical approaches together, then you are falling under the interactive model or the balanced model. Theorists of this approach believe that there is a middle ground or a way to have these approaches interact with one another, and one of those theorists is Rumelhart, who believes in the interactive model of reading. That's his theory, and it's neither a top-down or a bottom-up approach. He believes that the higher levels of a student's thinking and their background knowledge influence their comprehension, as well as their ability to decode and recognize words. So their phonics foundation, along with their background knowledge, work together to provide the student with the ability to comprehend text that they're not familiar with. So what do I believe and why do I believe it? In my classroom, the theoretical approach that I believe in and implement is the balanced interactive approach. Just as there is no one way to teach a child, we have all the different learning styles. I don't believe there's one way for literacy instruction to happen, or one way for literacy comprehension to happen. I think the schema theory is great until you have children who have no life experiences. They haven't traveled anywhere. They don't have anything to relate back to. And so I believe they need a different approach rather than building from their background knowledge, because they might not have as much background knowledge as someone else. And then I also believe that the automatic information processing is great until you have a student with a speech impediment, which I am experiencing right now in my classroom with a child who spells the way they speak, and therefore they have trouble putting the correct sounds with the correct letters because that's not the sounds that they hear being made when they do it. So I believe each scenario in each classroom is unique and it should be treated as so. I believe that everyone should do what best fits the needs of the individual learners in their classroom. So the schema theory is something that I implement, and research shows that there are benefits to activating the background knowledge prior to reading this. Students are more likely to retain and comprehend the information when they have something that they can relate it back to. And the schema theory refers to three things that can happen while a child is reading: accretion, tuning, and reconstruction. So when a student reads something, for say a book about fishing, and the student is already aware of all the information that was presented in that book, then accretion happens, where the only thing that happened for that child while they were reading is that their knowledge was confirmed. So nothing was needed to be changed. Whereas in tuning, this happens when nothing they read changes, but there is some new information that is added to what they already know. So for instance, if the child was reading a book about fishing and they knew that there were a lot of types of fish, but they learned of a new type of fish, that would simply add to the knowledge that they already had. Reconstruction happens when they read something and it changes what they thought to be true. For instance, if they're reading the book about fishing and they believed that worms were the only way or type of bait that could catch a fish, but then they realized that crickets can also catch a fish, well, that changes what they thought to be true, so reconstruction would have to happen. I think the schema theory also requires a lot of metacognition, where the students have to think about what they know in order for one of these three processes to happen. So how I use it in my classroom, two of the major ways I use it are KWL charts. So in these charts, you have 3 different columns, and we'll interact with this chart before and after the reading process. So we look at a topic. For instance, right now we're doing extreme weather, and before we began this, we looked at the know section. What is everything I know about extreme weather? Well, we live in Georgia, so we don't see a lot of blizzards. We don't see a lot of tornadoes. So there are some situations that we're not as familiar with. However, we might know these are extreme. So my students will list all the things they know about extreme weather. And then they also have to think about, what do I not know that I could learn from this? And that goes in the want column. And so we write in that column things that we want to learn from this while we are reading. And that just requires them to come up with any questions that they may have based on the knowledge that they have and the knowledge that they know they don't have. And then at the end, we refer back to this chart and we fill in our learned column. It is common to see students who have a whole lot of information in the know column don't have as much in the learn column because they already knew a lot of the information. Whereas students who have less information in the know column will learn a lot more, so their learn column is a lot larger. And I've done this in 2 ways. One, as a whole class up on the smartboard, and then as individuals where everyone has one that they create in their own reading notebook that they can refer back to. Another thing that I use are picture walks. So I have taught 5th and 4th grade, and I think picture walks are commonly used in pre-K, kindergarten, 1st grade as lower level readers. However, I find picture walks to be extremely beneficial in 4th and 5th grade as well. We look through, and while you might think you have no knowledge on a topic, as you see pictures, you can relate some of the things that you know to these pictures. So I use that for my students to have something that they can relate to before they begin reading. The other theory that I use in my classroom is automatic information processing. And one of the largest factors that affects a child's comprehension is their fluency. So this theory helps to identify exactly where the breakdown is happening and allow the teacher to intervene and help where it is needed. So it has five key components: the visual memory, phonological memory, episodic memory, semantic memory, and attention. In my classroom specifically, I'm using Fry phrases. In 4th grade, students are expected to read 140 words per minute. Personally, at the beginning of the year, I'm comfortable with about 100 words per minute. And I have 5 students who are right now reading between 50 and 70 words per minute. So we use Fry phrases, which is just phrases written out on sentence strips, and there are about 150 of them, and they're broken into different stages. So the strips contain high-frequency words that are often seen in reading, and you read them repeatedly. So like over and over again, the students will read them until it becomes automatic to them. They're not having to decode it anymore. It becomes automatic. And so as you go up in the stages of the phrases, the text and the wording, it gets a little more difficult. The terms are a little more difficult and it's trickier, but it helps them become more automatic in order to increase that fluency and ultimately increase their comprehension. I also use Click or Clunk, which is a comprehension strategy. It has a lot of different components, but for this, what I like most is that my students who I know are not reading on grade level. They're reading on a 2nd grade level, but they're required to read these 4th grade passages and understand them. I want them to take some of the attention away from the decoding phase and put the attention on the comprehension phase. So for that reason, they have a section where they're allowed to, when they identify a word they don't know, they can either come ask me or they can look it up in a dictionary to figure out how to pronounce it and what the word means. And I think by taking away some of the stress from the decoding, I'm able to see, can they comprehend the whole text and what it's saying aside from just that word. And the technology that I use in my classroom, we use Read Theory and Microsoft Office 365. Read Theory just allows me to really individualize my instruction, see where my students are reading at, which forms they have struggle with, whether it's opinion, informational, or narrative. And then Office 365 reads to them, and I believe the more that a child is read to while they're able to follow along with the text, the better they will be able to recognize these words and learn from them. So the biggest takeaway I have is to do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better. And I feel like from this class, I know better, and now I'm able to do better and implement it in my classroom. Thank you.